This week's episode of our show has been sponsored by the Grim Hollow Monster Grimoire, which is just launched on Kickstarter.
Our friends at Ghostfire Games are releasing this book packed with over 400 new monsters for 5th edition.
Kelly and I love dark fantasy, and this book is offering an amazing bestiary of horrific creatures, abominations, and undead monstrosities inspired by your favorite tales of grim, dark, dreary monster tales.
Not only that, but this book is going to contain rules for how to harvest monster parts and the crazy items that you can make with those parts.
Also, the book is going to be packed with tons of great advice for dungeon masters on how to make the most of these monsters in your adventures and encounters.
You can follow the links below to join in on the Kickstarter now. And now, onto this week's episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything Dungeons & Dragons, including advice for players and guides for dungeon masters.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Today, we're taking a look at party role and composition in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Because D&D is a teamwork-based game where several characters work together to defeat monsters, explore dungeons, and overcome the various challenges of their adventure, every character has their own role or their set of skills that they bring to the party to help them succeed.
Now, you might be used to the party roles defined by video games, things like the tank, DPS, and healer. But Dungeons & Dragons is a little bit more nuanced than that. And your player character might actually fit several different roles in the party.
Today, we're going to discuss a little bit about how these party roles work and why they're important and something that dungeon masters and players should think about, and break down what some of the party roles we think are really important in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. There's a lot to discuss, so let's get rolling.
So why is a party role important in Dungeons & Dragons? As we said before, this is a team-based game. So no single player is going to be able to cover all of the different party roles needed to solve every problem. And a single character might struggle with certain elements of the game because of their definition through their choices that they've made.
Well, every individual player character is always going to have their strengths and weaknesses. That's why you've got your teammates to cover the gaps that you can't. And this gives every player in the group a chance to shine as well, because different challenges and different combat encounters or different problems in exploration are going to call for different roles and different specializations. It means that every player character gets a chance to shine, do something really important, and feel like a key member of the team, rather than someone just hogging the spotlight the whole time.
Now, also in Dungeons & Dragons, you aren't pigeonholed into being defined by a single role. The character that you create, the class, subclass, and other elements that you choose are going to broaden the range on what your character can lend themselves to in definition of the roles. Your party tank might also be useful in certain other social or exploration situations. And through the whole team, you're going to be able to put together a sort of Venn diagram that allows you to cover multiple areas of the various roles.
And even if your party doesn't have a dedicated member filling one of these roles, you might only be a spell or magic item away from being able to do so, such as a wizard polymorphing themselves into a T-Rex to take the front lines, or a character finding a helm of teleportation that brings some really important utility to the group. Rather than player characters needing to obsess during character creation about making sure that every single party role is filled, it's actually not too important because you can always fill gaps in a pinch. Rather, it's more important as a dungeon master that you consider how your party is able to overcome different types of problems by looking at what party roles are present in your group.
And just because you have designed a character that fills a certain role doesn't mean you aren't able to lend yourself to the other roles that you don't have filled in the party. You'd be surprised how many of these roles you can fill with a simple 4-person party, even though we're talking about 7 different roles that can be filled in Dungeons & Dragons today.
So with that, let's take a look at what we've defined as the 7 different roles that are key to Dungeons & Dragons adventures. What's important to note here is that we are not just discussing combat. Unlike video games, which have a very strict tank healer DPS sort of dynamic that only works for combat, or even in Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition, where the idea of the defender, the striker, the controller, and the leader was championed as well for combat, we're going to be discussing roles for the party that both impact combat, exploration, problem solving, and social interaction, because D&D is a rich game and there's more to it than just bashing skulls.
That being said, the first role we are looking at today is a little bit combat focused, and this is one that we are calling the frontliner. This is a character who is going to be standing toe-to-toe with the enemies and taking a brunt of the damage.
This character often has a melee focus, often has very good hit points, and may have either a great armor class or special resistances of some kind, and they may have abilities or features that divert attacks towards them. While there are many ways in Dungeons & Dragons to avoid damage, avoid hits, and even distract foes, the frontliner is really defined by their ability to take that direct punch right on the chin and stay standing afterwards.
Yeah, and when we're looking at this role, you might be leaning towards the obvious choices, things like the barbarian running into battle headfirst with all of their hit points, or the heavily armor-clad paladin standing up at the front lines defending the rest of the party. But you can go far beyond that with your frontliner, and using abilities and spells, there's a lot of other options out there.
Endurance is the key factor here. And so this is where our definition of the frontliner really overlaps with the traditional video game definition of the tank. But we do want to acknowledge that in Dungeons & Dragons, it's not necessarily about having a high AC, and it's not necessarily about having a ton of hit points. Those help, but there are other ways to do it. You could be a moon druid or a blade singer wizard. These characters can, in a pinch, operate on the front lines very, very effectively and take those incoming attacks. They just do it in a way that is different from what we would traditionally consider perhaps to be a tank.
So when you are thinking about playing a frontliner, take into account the character that you want to play and whether they have any abilities or access to spells or other options that can bolster their AC or bolster their hit points temporarily for the duration of a combat encounter. If they can, chances are they make a great frontliner.
The next role that we're going to look at today is what we call the beatdown. This is the traditional damage dealer, but there's a lot of ways to deal damage in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. You might be a polearm master wielding fighter. You could be a raging barbarian. You could be an artillery style blaster mage. You could be a ranger sniping down enemies with your bow, or you could be a rogue making those surgical strikes. No matter what you are using to deal the damage, though, these characters are all united in the idea that they are the ones that are going to end the fight by eliminating your enemies. And this is an important element of any Dungeons & Dragons party. And while many characters can deal damage, knowing who in your party is the one that you're going to reliably look to throw down when it matters is really, really critical. I've seen a ton of Dungeons & Dragons parties struggle doing fancy tricks to control the enemies and not actually getting anywhere forward with the combat because no one was actually throwing a good punch.
In most cases, during a combat encounter in Dungeons & Dragons, one of the major focuses is that you need to be out-damaging the enemy. There's a lot of different ways to do that, but somebody in the party needs to be focusing on delivering blows on the enemy to take them down. This role can actually switch from character to character depending on the round of combat, and actually looking for the openings and who has the best opportunity to land a critical strike against the enemy. That is going to be the person that you want to lean on. In some combat encounters, it could be the rogue, and everybody's trying to lean into getting them their sneak attack so that they can make those surgical strikes. Other times, it might be letting the paladin unleash their divine smites upon a fiend or undead and letting them take that role as being the primary damage dealer. But you need to take those enemies down, and somebody's got to deal that damage.
The reason why this role can often move from party member to party member is because there's a huge variety of foes in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, many of whom have interesting resistances, defenses, or other features of their own. That polearm master wielding fighter isn't going to be able to leverage all that amazing damage they can deal against a flying dragon. who might also be immune to the fire damage that the sorcerer is throwing down. So that's where the ranger becomes really, really important. So oftentimes it's worth looking at all the variety of ways that damage can be dealt and how different scenarios favor different kinds of damage dealing, and thinking about, okay, do we have someone that can do the range damage? Do we have someone to do the magic damage and someone to do that physical, really hard punch? Also, even being able to distinguish between area of effect damage and single target damage can be really, really important. And so, well, ultimately, many characters are going to be the beatdown. One of the key things to recognize when you're working together as a team is who is the beatdown in the party in a given combat encounter. And once you know that, it can be really, really eye-opening, because you'll realize, oh, yeah, I'm the wizard, but I actually should not be putting down my wall of force right now because I'm actually the only one that can deal damage to this physical damage immune golem.
And also, if you see an opportunity where your character could deal damage, but somebody else in the party is better suited at being the beatdown, it might be more beneficial for you to lean into one of the other party roles that could benefit the beatdown to deliver those blows.
And that's where the utility character comes into play. Utility is a very, very nuanced role, but generally speaking, the way that Kelly and I define it is that a character has utility when they are bringing a new tool into the toolkit of the party. These tools might include things like invisibility. They might include things like flight or teleportation. These are all tools that could be used to get that grounded fighter into the air. You've just brought utility into the battlefield. But it could also include things like battlefield control, like illusions, or magic that incapacitates, immobilizes, or otherwise takes enemies out of the fight and neutralizes them as threats, just long enough for the damage dealers to get the job done.
Every situation in Dungeons & Dragons is a puzzle, whether it be combat, exploration, or social. It is a puzzle that you need to solve to bring your party out on top of the situation being presented. A utility character, such as a wizard, a rogue, or a bard, needs to be a Swiss Army knife that can pull on its multiple tools, abilities, spells, or various feats or magic items that it has to shift the situation in a way that benefits the party.
You might be using your skills and interacting with the environment in creative ways and finding those really non-standard, off-the-wall ideas. That's the essence of utility, and you never know when you create an unexpected and new advantage that didn't exist before. If you love creative play and tactical thinking, you're probably going to love playing a utility character, because that Swiss Army knife feeling of having the right tool for the job is an amazing feeling when you pull it off.
Another very subtle role in Dungeons & Dragons is that of the support character. Now, the support character is looking for opportunities to bolster the already existing party dynamic to make everybody better at what they're already trying to do.
The important distinction between a utility character and a support character is that a utility character is bringing new tools and new capabilities to the party, whereas a support character is sharpening those tools, honing them so that they work better, more efficiently, and more reliably.
If we look at some spells like Bless, Aid, or Haste, these are great examples of spells that can be used to bolster the party and make them better at what they're already good at. A support character bringing the right spells and the right tools to, say, cast haste on the paladin, giving them an extra attack and being able to deliver more damage on their turn, just means that this unsung hero of the support character is actually making a major impact on the game by helping the other party roles be better at what they're supposed to do.
A support character also just might be there to make sure that the characters are even able to do what they need to do in the first place. This is where the support character intersects with the traditional role of the healer. And we choose to define the role as support rather than healer because healer is just too narrow for D&D. The ability to heal your other party members is part of the toolkit of support. It keeps them doing what they were already doing. And there might be other important spells like Dispel Magic, Revivify, Greater Restoration, Raise Dead, Regenerate, Heal, all those spells that take away those really nasty status effects and allow characters to continue to operate at full capacity, even when they're in deadly situations.
Many classes have abilities, spells, and features that allow them to lend themselves to a support role. Some have more than others. Classes like clerics and bards are great support characters, but you'd be surprised to find a lot of support options built into classes like druids, paladins, and many others. Pay attention to the abilities and features that your class has and see how you can use them to benefit the rest of the party.
The frontline and beatdown have obvious applications in combat, and the utility and support characters apply both in and out of combat. But as we go a little bit further, we're getting away from the roles that impact combat and more the ones that look at more problem solving and exploration. And the first of these is the Investigator. Mysteries, problems, strange circumstances are a major theme of Dungeons & Dragons, and somebody in your party has to be able to fill the role of the Investigator. This might be a shared role because the Investigator is ultimately there to figure out the situation, understand what's going on, and help the party decide what to do next. And so sometimes this role can actually be split across many party members very, very readily.
When you're looking at the investigator role, you're looking at things like knowledge checks or perception, investigation, survival. There are a lot of different ways that an investigator can solve problems in the world of Dungeons and Dragons. And in the worlds of Dungeons and Dragons, there are so many various types of problems that you can encounter that having your wizard be skilled at Arcana and investigation versus the rogue who has very high perception and insight might be able to work together to solve the various mysteries that are happening in the game.
Essentially, these skills are going to help your characters gather clues and information about the world. And it might be far more than just your skill checks as well. There are tons of amazing spells, from Detect Magic, Speak with Dead, Contact Other Plane, True Seeing, and much, much more that can be really important tools in gathering information, assembling clues, and analyzing the facts that are out there in front of your characters. And oftentimes, you can sometimes either short circuit an adventure with good investigation or end up against a total brick wall if your party doesn't have the means to assemble the right facts. I think this is one of those party roles that a dungeon master really has to analyze properly and see what types of information their party can analyze and can search for, what they're going to struggle with, and what they're going to find almost immediately.
If your party warlock didn't take proficiency in Arcana and they're the only spellcaster in the party and you keep running into magical scenarios that you need to make Arcana checks to investigate, it could be a problem for solving those puzzles in the games of Dungeons and Dragons. So be aware of the skills that your other party members have at their disposal and what ones you can bring to fill in the necessary investigation checks that might happen. And I don't just mean investigation, the skill. I mean the whole range of different skills and abilities that you might use to solve the various mysteries.
It's become a little bit of a meme how important the perception skill is, but perception is just one skill of many that characters can use to investigate their surroundings. Of course, there is the investigation skill, but those knowledge skills actually can matter sometimes. And often they're neglected when I think that a lot of dungeon masters care about those skills quite a lot and always are looking for an opportunity to spout lore. So take the knowledge skills. Your dungeon master will thank you.
Now, as we move into the more social aspect of the game, your party probably needs a negotiator as well. This is probably going to be a charisma-based character who is skilled at dealing with the social interactions that make up a D&D adventure.
Now, you can talk your way out of many, many dangerous situations and talk your way into them as well. So being the party face or the high charisma character is an important role to have in the party, but it definitely should not be your only one. Some characters may need to decide what kind of negotiator they might be. You might have the good cop and the bad cop in your party, and these will give you a variety of strategies for interfacing with the wide range of social situations and social problems that your character can encounter. Again, negotiation in Dungeons & Dragons isn't just like making the speech check in Fallout. It's not like you can just get your check high enough and it acts like mind control and you instantly defeat the boss. It can require a little bit of, well, negotiation. And there are certain circumstances where you can't talk your way out of it. And so you're going to have to be prepared to balance that out with your other party roles and other capabilities too.
The Negotiator is one of the more nuanced roles because so many different characters can fill this at different opportunities. You might have one charisma-based character who is exceptionally good at intimidation and another one who is exceptionally good at persuasion. And even if you aren't using those skills, you might have somebody at the table who's better at solving certain social situations and another person at the table who's better at solving others. Somebody who can really give a good speech to a group of troops to get them riled up and ready to fight with you for a battle versus somebody who's really good at the table with haggling with the shopkeepers to get a better price or talking to the villain in a way that makes the speech draw out longer so that everybody can prepare for the upcoming battle. There's a lot of ways to be the negotiator in the party, and oftentimes the negotiator will also fill other roles that are presented.
It's also important to acknowledge that the negotiator role is not the same as role-playing your character. Just because you enjoy role-playing does not necessarily mean that your character is going to be the negotiator of the party, or necessarily require that you, as a player, actually be a good negotiator or actually be role-playing in character and bargaining these things out. There's a wide variety of ways to solve these negotiation problems that don't necessarily hinge on you as a player actually being a sweet talker. Even if you as yourself are a shy person, you still might fulfill the negotiator role because you've decided to role-play a character who is. So it's really important within this role to not get our wires crossed about the role-playing element of it, and instead focus on how the negotiator is a problem solver and can be role-played in a wide variety of ways.
Also keep in mind that even if you are a terrible negotiator in real life, but you are a spellcaster who has access to suggestion and various mind control or charm elements, you might make a great negotiator for the party.
The final role that we're going to be looking at is what we call the Infiltrator or the Explorer, depending on exactly which tack you want to take with it. This is a character who emphasizes stealth in order to get into a dangerous or hostile environment, explore it, gather information, or perform reconnaissance or scouting, and come back to the party. Or in that process, get in there, fulfill some kind of objective, and get back out again. It has a lot of overlap with a variety of other utility and perhaps even negotiation elements, but we feel it's important enough to acknowledge as its own distinct role.
Now, what's really interesting about this role is when we talk about stealth and infiltration, the first thing that comes to mind is a rogue. But keep in mind that there are a lot of different ways for stealth and infiltration to work in Dungeons & Dragons. A moon druid being able to wild shape into a unsuspecting animal form is just as good of an infiltrator. Or a wizard with their familiar who can then see through their familiar's lens and fly their familiar into the base is also a really good infiltrator. Either way, it is extremely beneficial for your party to have some means of scouting ahead and observing situations that are yet to come so that you can properly prepare for the adventure you're going on.
Getting into the dungeon or the adventure site and getting out again is really important, and you might accomplish this in a variety of ways. A ranger could help the entire party stealth by using Pass Without Trace, or team up with the wizard to upcast invisibility on the entire party. Perhaps you might even use spells like Teleport and Dimension Door to get into the heart of where you're trying to infiltrate into. There's a lot of various ways to achieve these things. And so thinking about how your party is going to scout locations and get to them is a really, really key thing to keep in your toolkit.
Many characters don't do a lot of scouting, and in fact, many parties like to barge in the front door with their weapons ready. And although that sometimes works, The ability to infiltrate and scout, to look ahead and find the hazards, traps, enemies, and other items that might cause problems for you. And being able to know that ahead of time can greatly impact your upcoming adventures in Dungeons & Dragons.
It used to be in the old days of Dungeons & Dragons, there was a dedicated navigator and mapper whose whole purpose in the party, maybe not necessarily a character role, but a player role at the table, was to map out the dungeon, to help the party explore and figure out where the important things were. And this is often a role that is neglected in modern Dungeons & Dragons, and thinking about how your party might navigate their adventures in a non-linear way as an active role can go a long way to not making your campaigns feel like a railroad.
Yeah, and a lot of dungeons have more than one entrance, and a lot of parties don't even try looking for the other entrance. As we conclude this episode, what's really important here is that your character might fill multiple roles. Depending on the class you choose, most classes are defined by one or two of these roles, but based on the subclass, the spells, the feats, the magic items, and the skills and abilities that your character gets, you, throughout the game of Dungeons & Dragons, are going to broaden the horizons on how many of these roles you can fill. And by the end of it, the various members of your party are going to create a lovely Venn diagram that overlaps in several different areas. And given any situation in the game, you can kind of transition into what is needed in those moments to propel the other players into the right roles at the right time to solve all the problems coming at you in a game of Dungeons & Dragons.
Whether you're a player or a dungeon master, it's important to not obsess too much about making sure your party has every single role nailed down to a high level of competence. As a dungeon master, I find it's important to take stock of what roles are present in your party when you're planning your adventures, and perhaps designing your adventures to perhaps challenge a weakness, or to make sure that it's not going to be short-circuited because your party doesn't fulfill a specific role. But I never force the players to make sure that they have every single role covered. I find that a little inorganic. And I also am not a huge fan of injecting non-player characters to cover those roles either. Rather, what I try to do is, if my party does have a glaring weakness, like they don't have a healer, I give them a couple extra healing potions. If they're lacking a proficiency in a key knowledge skill, which is going to be important, maybe they'll find a magic item like a professor orb that can help them, or a helm of teleportation, or another useful magic item that they can use to still actively be the ones in control of that role, rather than having an NPC to fill the gap.
And if you're a player designing your character, don't worry so much about does the party need a healer or does it need an investigator. Chances are the character that you want to play is going to be able to lean into various roles within the party. And you'd be surprised what you can get away with obscure parties that are missing a dedicated healer. A lot of people think, oh no, we don't have a cleric, what are we going to do? But not realizing that bards, druids, and various other classes have a lot of access to ways to lean into a healer role. This applies to almost any role presented here today. So play the character you want to play and look at the various options you have and see how you can help out the entire party with your skill set.
Even with a party of 3 or 4 characters and 7 roles, there's a lot of really cool combinations, and Kelly and I actually started brainstorming a couple of our ideas about the different 4-character combos that could accomplish these roles in a variety of interesting and compelling ways. If you have some ideas about a combo of several classes or subclasses that might work well together to nail down all of these roles, tell us about them in the comments below.
So this has been a look at party roles in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Tell us about your favorite party role to play and what dynamics of characters you think make up the best parties in Dungeons & Dragons in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, please consider checking us out on Patreon by following the links in the description below.
And don't forget, our live play Dungeons of Drakkenheim is coming to Kickstarter. We've partnered with Ghostfire Games to bring this campaign to life as a 5th edition module. Head over to DRAKKENHEIM.com or follow the links below to join the mailing list and be up to date on all the information regarding this Kickstarter. And don't forget to check out our live play in the Worlds of Drakkenheim, which airs Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern at Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we have plenty more guides for players and Dungeon Masters in D&D 5e right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
in the dungeon.